Hey everybody, Bandicoot Commando here, and welcome back to Pac-Man World Re-Pac. Last time I tried to get to round 9 on the arcade version of the game, but obviously I'm not the best at Pac-Man, so yeah, nothing we can do about that. Still, always good to go back to the arcade once in a while. So today, I am going to talk about the development of Pac-Man World and to a lesser degree, maybe Pac-Man World Re-Pac, even though I don't think there's much development history on that one compared to the original game. Because I didn't really talk about the original game's development when I first did it on my channel, because at the time, there wasn't really a lot of information on its development, and plus, this was before I developed into the style that where I am now, where I talk about a game's development history and all of that. So, let us begin. Pac-Man Pac-Man World entered early development as early as 97, I believe. At the time, the idea of making a 3D Pac-Man game was coming up. They had different titles of Pac-Man 3D, 3D Pac-Man Adventure Game, but it got to the point where they came up with the idea of Pac-Man Ghost Zone. While there's really a lot I can offer with Ghost Zone in terms of how it would have played and all of that, a lot of Ghost Zone's assets are in the original game still. You can find textures and models and other things within the game that link to Ghost Zone. I'm not really going to show them as much as I should, but it's in there because Ghost Zone does run on the same engine as World. They didn't change engines or anything for it. Next would be the story. As the team were developing the story, they got to the idea of early on when it was decided to put focus on Pac Man's 20th anniversary. They decided to initially use other Namco characters instead of just Pac Man's family and friends. At least with the exception of Miss Pac Man and Pac Professor, because they were considered their own unique characters. So, we would have had the likes of Dig Dug, Valkyrie, and Sandra from the Valkyrie, Legend of Valkyrie game, Mappy from Mappy. At some points, they also considered using other characters as well. As you can see with the storyboards here of what the game's intro was to be, you can see you can see who was meant to be in whose place. So obviously, Dig Dug was replaced by Chomp. Sandra and Valkyrie were replaced by Puka and Pac-Man Baby, while Pac-Man Jr. ended up being replaced, or Mappy, yeah, got replaced by Pac-Man Jr. Very interesting these storyboards would have been. You can also see that in the ending of the storyboards here, with the game's ending, was that the friends and family were meant to be in the crowd of Ghost. And that when Olsen fully revealed himself, part of the ending had that after Orson complains that nobody loves the ghost, Pac-Man would have. There we go. I hope my mic didn't is fully plugged back in. My mic unplugged on me. Anyway, Pac-Man would have offered some fake sympathy to Orson, saying everyone deserves to be loved, but he'd still end up chomping on Orson anyway because, as it notes in that storyboard, he just can't control himself. Part of the story with this version was that Pac Man and Orson, according to one of the game designers, Scott Rogers, Pac Man and Orson were originally friends and they were growing up together. The whole plot was meant to be a bit of a homage to Citizen Kane in a way, where Pac Man would become famous and a celebrity, but Orson essentially ended up being forgotten. to the point that he became jealous of Pac-Man's fame and popularity, that he wanted to emulate it, to the point that he even tried to have a fake Miss Pac-Man to love, but that's where he got the idea to make the Tonkman mech. There were two other Namco characters that were considered to be used before they ended up being replaced. One of them would have been Gil, short for Gilgamesh, from the Tower of Drunga, which was another popular Namco arcade game, although that one is more well known in Japan than here in America. The same goes to Legend of Valkyrie, where Valkyrie and Sandra are from. Another one would have been Maru. Maru is from Pac and Pal. Never really played the game, and I don't know much of it, but Maru is the pal in the title. Once they figured out how they wanted to get the story going and all, you can see a few of these concept sketches here that they've made of Pac-Man and such. Very nicely made they are. This here we have a somewhat unhinged, creepy looking Tonk Man. Initially, Orson was meant to resemble Orson Welles, the actor who was in Citizen Kane. He's even described as being a very top heavy looking ghost. Kind of an ironic thing considering how the ghosts normally are. Once they finally got somewhere to go with the game, here we have an early design of what was meant to be Ghost Island. Based on how it looks, I would assume that this was meant to be the hub of Ghost Island that you would explore around. You couldn't access the mansion area yet, and probably the other areas, until you can complete the other areas first. The pirate area is just simply known as the Pirate Fortress. Presumably, once you enter in the level, you'd keep going to it would be either one big level or it would just be like a gauntlet of levels until you can complete them. Notice on the map though that the space area is missing. Before the space area, there was a completely different level that was simply known as the Pack Forest. I'm assuming that the Pack Forest or the forest area was the original plan for it before it ended up being removed and the space area replaced it. Here's just a few little images of the pirate area, but one that you have here is with HMS Windbag. This comes from one of the betas from the 98 or 99 beta, and instead of being called Windbag, he was known as HMS Hanky. Not sure why they gave him a name like that, but it's at least a little better. Like, to be fair, as funny as Windbag is, it's a little better than Hanky if you were to ask me. That's my personal opinion, though. Another point of contention with the story is when it came to Pac Man's character. They weren't exactly sure, and Namco wasn't entirely sure either, how they wanted Pac Man to be portrayed. There was ideas to have him speak, but they weren't sure when it came to the voice. They didn't know if they want him to speak in a high cutesy voice, which is a typical Japanese thing, or if they wanted it to be a little low and deep and mature sounding. After that, though, there was then an idea that Pac-Man didn't really speak English, but would speak some kind of gibberish, I guess you can call it, that's meant to be the Wonka Wonka sound effects from the game, but it would be translated into text for to be read. Unfortunately, that was also cut just due to how tricky it would be to put the subtitles on. Another idea is when it came to Orson Tonkman. While I'm not sure if he was considered to voice Orson or just the Tonkman robot, they originally considered getting James Earl Jones, the great James Earl Jones, to voice Tonkman. But like I said, I'm not sure if he would strictly voice the Tonk Man robot or if he would have voiced both the robot and Orson. Given the nature of the reveal, I would say that he was only going to voice the robot. Obviously, though, James Earl Jones would have been really expensive because, come on, Darth Vader, Mufasa, the list goes on of the many roles he's done. Great man he was, too. Uh, the only other thing I can show and talk about, and I briefly mentioned this in the Re-Pac video, was when me and Kali were doing the Manic Minds level, I mentioned that there was a third ruins area for the original game. It ended up being cut though, called the Kooky Crypt. The Kooky Crypt is in the game's data of the original, and it's playable to a degree, but it's mostly incomplete and unfinished. You can only get up to a point where you can't go any further because the rest of the level's geometry and such is missing, and therefore it's incomplete. The maze for it is complete and playable, but beyond that, we don't know anything else of what this level could have been. So have a look at it yourself and see. Pretty neat, huh? Bit of a shame that they couldn't keep it in, but I'm assuming they were running out of time in development, so therefore they that's just all that there was, is that they just couldn't finish it in time. Other than that, there's really nothing left I can share about the game. Pac-Man Ghost Zone would be something, but I don't really think there's much to go on by it. And I don't have access to the well, actually, there are a few little things I can say regarding the Re-Pac version. One of them would be the Chrome Keeper, to be honest. The Chrome Keeper's fight in the Re-Pac version actually resembles how the fight it was meant to be in the concept art for the original version. So this makes it rather interesting that the Re-Pac version of the fight is what they wanted to do in the original, but they didn't have time to fully implement it and get it to work. Thank God for advancement of hardware, I guess, for that sort of thing. Another note to make would be with the credits of Re-Pac. When the game initially came out with the credits, it got to the point where it did not credit the original team that made the original Pac-Man World game. Not Namco, but the other team that did most of the work on it. And Scott Rogers, one of the game designers who will happily tell you what you want to know about game design and his time on Pac-Man World, he was not pleased to see that he and his team were not credited in the Re-Pac version for working on the original. Of course, Namco would rectify this, and a later patch would include them in the credits, which pleased Scott to know that they fixed the mistake. Other than that, I think that's all I can share. Like, it's a short video, but that's because, again, there's not really much more I can share on this other than what we know and what what we have. I could again share the textures and assets from Ghost Zone, but again, that's its own can of worms. Actually, there is one more thing I can say about the original. There was an idea to remake the arcade maze and turn it into a 3D maze, much like they did in the game. Unfortunately, though, they didn't have time, but the model, an untextured model of it, does exist in the game. So the idea was there to pay homage, but they just didn't have time to execute with it. So with that, I think I'm just going to stop there. So that will do for this episode of Pac-Man World Re-Pac. Uh, I personally had fun doing it because of how, again, when I did Pac-Man World 3 a few years back, I thought I would be done doing the Pac-Man World games, but a small part of me in the back of my mind figured that it would get remastered. I just didn't expect it to get remastered so soon. Like, literally, I think it was either like a year or two after I got done with 3 is when they announced it, and I'm like, oh, I'm going back into the world of Pac-Man. And here I am before starting Re-Pac 2. That's when they announce Re-Pac, or sorry, before I went into doing Re-Pac, they then announced Re-Pac 2. So it'll be funny if I do Re-Pac 2 and then they're like, hey, here's the third one. That would be something. So I'll see you guys in the next one, which is a beloved childhood classic of mine. So that is it, and I will see you guys next time.